Anthony Hardy became known as the Camden Ripper after dismembered body parts were found in the refuse bins of a North London estate in 2002. He later admitted to 3 gruesome murders and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But I believe that Hardy could have been stopped earlier in his killing career had he not fallen through the cracks between the police and the mental health services, which left him free to kill in the community. My name is David Wilson, and I've spent my entire career studying or working with serious and violent offenders. I'm particularly known for studying serial murderers, and my hypothesis is that serial killers don't emerge fully formed when we first hear about them in the media. They're a long time in the making. So the challenge for me is not to discover when they stopped killing, but to discover when they first started to kill, to see if they can be connected to other unsolved murders. In my time as Professor of Criminology at Birmingham City University, I've learned one important lesson. If criminology is to have real meaning, it can't just be discussed in libraries or in lecture theatres, but it has to be reconnected to real crimes and to real people. So I'm going to get out of the university and reconsider some of the most complicated modern cases of serial murder to see if those serial killers have been getting away with murder. Criminology is the scientific study of criminals and their crimes. It's a multidisciplinary field that combines elements of psychology, victimology, and anthropology to discover the nature of how and why people commit crimes. I want to use my new hypothesis about serial murder to look at one of the most disturbed serial killers I've ever examined, Anthony Hardy, the Camden Ripper. On the 30th of December 2002, when police discovered dismembered human remains in a bin in North London, they had no idea that these body parts would lead them to a serial killer. Criminologically, when a murderer kills, he's got one immediate problem. How does he dispose of the body? In Hardy's case, what he would do would put the bodies of these women in the bath and then cut them up, and then put the body parts in black bin liners and bring them to the bins in the hope that the council was going to take them away. And after all, who's going to look in black bin liners? In Hardy's case, he was unlucky in 2 respects, because firstly, the people who do look in black bin liners are homeless people. Secondly, he was unlucky because that homeless person was only able to look in those black bin liners because the council picked up the rubbish a day late. If they had picked it up on time, then Hardy might have got away with what he was doing and gone on to kill again. Just 36 hours later, the police discovered more body parts, and the horrific truth became clear. They came from 2 different women. A major murder investigation was launched, local CCTV footage was seized, and on it, Hardy had been filmed actually disposing of his victims' body parts.
After 2 days of macabre discoveries on this North London housing estate, the police have now named the man they consider as their prime suspect. He is Anthony Hardy, an unemployed man in his 50s.
They quickly moved in to arrest Hardy in his flat on the estate, just yards from where the body parts had been discovered. But Hardy had gone. What they uncovered was truly shocking. When the police went into Anthony Hardy's flat after more body parts had been found on Plender Street, they found quite an extraordinary scene. There was strange writing that made no sense on the doors, on the walls. There were bizarre pictures. There were some blood-stained tracksuit bottoms at the bottom of a bedroom door. But when the police pushed through into the bedroom, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. In some black plastic bin liners, they found the dismembered body of Elizabeth Velad, and on top of the bin liners were the knives, the saw that Hardy had used quite clearly to cut her body up. But if that wasn't bad enough, when the police sprayed luminol, which is the chemical that the police will use to trace dried blood, the true scale of the horror was going to be revealed. Because there was dried blood in the living room, and it was quite clear what Hardy had done to Elizabeth. He dragged her body from the living room into the bedroom where she was going to be dismembered. There was dried blood, therefore, all over this flat. This was an abattoir. It wasn't just 29-year-old Elizabeth Velad that Hardy had butchered in his flat. Police later identified the second victim as 34-year-old Bridget Mlennon. Both had worked in the sex industry in the nearby red light district of King's Cross. Mary MacDonald was a close friend of Bridget and remembers her well.
I met Bridget about 97. Bridget was a really nice girl. She was good fun. She liked to drink. She liked to party, you know. But she was a good mum as well. I met her again in 2002. Bumped into her in King's Cross. I didn't recognise her, and she looked rough. She looks really skinny, and you know she'd hit hard times. She'd lost her flat, and she had a bad crack habit, and she was working the streets. And then, about a week later, New Year comes along, and I went into a newsagent and saw Tony Hardy's picture on the newspaper. Then I got a phone call the next day from another friend who said, "Barry, what was Bridget's surname? Was it Mlennon?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." She said, "Well, she's one of Tony Hardy's victims." I can't explain it, how I felt. It was really upsetting.
After Bridget and Elizabeth's bodies were found, police discovered that their prime suspect, Anthony Hardy, had a history of mental health problems. He'd been sectioned in the past and diagnosed with bipolar affective disorder. To get a sense of whether anyone on the estate had any idea about what he was capable of, I've come to meet his neighbour, Alan Young. Alan, how long have you lived on College Estate?
When I first moved here on this estate in 1966.
What happened on the estate when the police started to investigate these murders?
That's when the rumours started going round, and it ranged from one body, two bodies, three bodies, bodies chopped up around the estate and off the estate, and Tony had done a runner. But I didn't know that at the time. It just wasn't like him. He was sorry, man, he just kept himself to himself.
Hardy remained on the run for 2 days before police finally caught up with him. He was arrested, but refused to give any clues as to what lay behind his depraved killing spree.
Have you ever used that bin, Tony?
No comment.
You ever gone to that bin at all?
No comment.
Ever put any rubbish in it?
No comment.
Or ever taken any rubbish out of it?
No comment.
With Hardy remaining silent about his crimes, police brought in a leading forensic psychologist to probe the true state of his mind. What he discovered was even more shocking than the detectives could ever have imagined.
Some 44 pictures were taken of 2 of his victims. The photographs revealed features in terms of necrophilia.
Anthony Hardy, the Camden Ripper, was arrested after dismembered body parts from 2 women were found in a bin in North London. I want to discover whether more women had suffered an equally horrific fate at his hands. Police had arrested Hardy and found in his flat a collection of violent hardcore pornography with over 70 sadomasochistic films found in his bedroom. They also uncovered a cache of photographs of his victims taken after their death. Knowing Hardy had a history of mental illness, they brought in forensic psychologist Dr. Julian Boone to make an assessment of his current mental state and establish whether he could legitimately use mental illness as a defence.
I certainly, for one, would regard him as an extremely dangerous individual. Bipolar disorder does nothing to explain what went on in the Camden killings. The photographs reveal some interesting features in terms of necrophilia. Almost certainly, some 44 pictures were taken of 2 of his victims, the last 2, and they were positioned in obscene poses, post-mortem. All of this has strong tones of sexual fantasy. We know that they do not suddenly get this on their 51st birthday. It's something that's been with them as an interest throughout adult life, and quite possibly from adolescence onwards. So we're immediately thinking, well, could these be the first girls? And it may well be that a lot of girls have come within a very close shave indeed.
Dr. Boone's expert testimony helped to convict Hardy of both these murders. But shockingly, the trial also revealed that Hardy had killed another victim in almost identical circumstances a year earlier, but crucially had escaped without charge. In January 2002, 1 year before his arrest, police investigated an incident of criminal damage to Hardy's neighbour's door. Acid had been poured through her letterbox, and footprints led the police directly to Hardy, who confessed to the crime. Before leaving his flat, police discovered a locked door. Behind it, they found the naked corpse of 38-year-old sex worker Sally White lying on a bed. As forensic officers examined the scene, Sally's blood was discovered on the wall and inside the hood of her clothes. A bite mark from Hardy was also found on her right thigh, indicating she'd suffered a violent death. Despite this evidence, the body was sent to the pathologist for a post-mortem. However, to the astonishment and dismay of the police, the cause of death was ruled as natural causes. It was claimed that Sally White died of heart failure, most likely due to blocked arteries and shock during rough sex. So the only thing that police could charge Hardy with was criminal damage to his neighbour's flat, and he was placed in the care of Camden and Islington Mental Health Trust.
I've been doing a lot of research on this very complicated case, and I've come across an article written in 2012 about the Home Office pathologist, Freddie Patel, who struck off the Home Office register as a result of the post-mortem that he conducts on the newspaper vendor Ian Tomlinson, who gets accidentally caught up in the 2009 riots. Now, why Patel is important, I realise now that he was also the pathologist who was involved in conducting the post-mortem on Sally White. Now, Sally White was Hardy's first victim, and as the article makes clear, it says that Patel suggested that White had died from a heart attack during consensual sex, despite evidence of blood-stained clothing and bedding. And as the author of the article makes clear, this discouraged a police investigation that might have saved 2 later victims of Anthony Hardy.
After the death of Sally White, Hardy claimed to be suffering from mania. However, 3 months later, he was described as a model patient with no symptoms of mental illness and was released back to his flat in Camden, North London. For me, this is an intriguing discrepancy, so I want to speak to some of the people who knew and worked with Anthony Hardy before he was locked away. David Freed runs an art therapy program where Hardy was referred to after one of his psychotic phases.
When you first interviewed
Yes.
Anthony Hardy, how did he strike you?
He was a fairly heavy-set man. I mean, he was a little imposing, really. And my impression of him really was, I thought this is a man with an alcohol problem and possibly could have a bad temper.
In the time that he was with you in the studio for about 12 months, did he come across as aggressive? Did he come across as angry?
No, not really. He's kind of private but sociable.
Did he come across as mentally ill?
I don't think so.
I'd always got the impression that Anthony Hardy was somehow out of control because of his underlying mental health problems, his manic depression, his psychopathy. And yet talking to David revealed a whole different picture. You know, David knew Anthony Hardy for a year when he was turning up to his art therapy classes. And in that time, he turned up clean, he was washed, there was no mania, his speech patterns were ordered. And what's interesting, therefore, to me, is that I've got to investigate further if Anthony Hardy is genuinely mentally ill or simply using the mental health system for his own ends.
At Hardy's trial, he eventually admitted to murdering Elizabeth Velad, Bridget Mlennon, and Sally White, claiming they died as part of a violent sex game gone wrong. A report into his care was commissioned in 2005 to see if more could have been done to prevent his hideous crimes. It concluded there had been no negligence on the part of the authorities, but paints a picture of a man well practiced at hiding his true psychopathic nature.
Considering what they knew, they'd done very well in looking after his mental illness. Of course, what they didn't know was that Hardy was in fact a serial killer who'd taken a lot of trouble to conceal what he'd done from the people looking after him. If you don't know someone's background, it can be very, very difficult to diagnose a psychopathic personality. Once someone with his manipulative personality has a mental illness as well, it's a very ready opportunity to manipulate the system whilst concealing his true nature and his true motives. In my evidence of the inquiry, I described his personality disorder as untreatable, and I would stand by that term.
If Hardy was living with an untreatable personality disorder, what lies in his past is crucial in indicating whether or not he could be responsible for other murders as yet unsolved. Anthony Hardy was born in 1951 in Staffordshire. As a child, he excelled in school, eventually graduating with a degree in engineering. He married, fathered 4 children, and moved to Australia, where his relationship disintegrated. Tales of domestic violence emerged, and in 1982, he was arrested for a brutal attack on his wife, but the case was dropped. Divorced in 1986, Hardy spent time in mental hospitals both in Australia and in Britain, and in 1989 a doctor noted that Hardy had a very disturbed personality, but was only diagnosed with bipolar affective disorder 6 years later. In 1998 he was accused of indecent assault on a sex worker, but a lack of evidence prevented him from being charged. To assess whether Hardy could indeed be responsible for more unsolved murders, I'll need the help of some of the brightest young criminological minds in the country, my postgraduate students at Birmingham City University.
Okay, welcome. I'd like to know this time about the case of Anthony Hardy. Did he marry?
Yep, he did. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters.
It was in Australia that Hardy attacked his wife, but she was screaming and the children woke up, and so he was disturbed.
The charges were dropped, but he spent 10 days in psychiatric care.
So he's got a history of psychiatric care.
In the mid-90s, in 1995, he was detained under the Mental Health Act.
He's obsessed with pornography.
Uh-huh.
And shows a history of liking to dominate women.
First murder that we're aware of, he's 51. That seems quite old for a first murder to take place. The breakdown of the marriage begins in like 1982 from the attempted drowning of his wife, so I think to start looking at unsolved murders anytime from 1982 onwards.
My students have given me a lot of information about Hardy as a killer, but Hardy himself has refused to comment on any further crimes. So I've come to meet Richard Osley, a journalist who covered the Hardy case, who may have a lead.
Richard, you're in possession of some letters that Hardy wrote from prison. How did you come by those?
A woman who was researching her family tree who knew Hardy brought them in. Hardy had been supposedly helping her, and they'd spent a lot of time together. And once he was in prison, he was writing to her. He's writing about how he's praying for forgiveness, and he's found God.
Would it be possible for me to read those letters? I'd find that very interesting in terms of trying to look at Hardy and what might be motivating him to see if they offer some clues. Is that possible?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
I think there are really two interesting things about these letters. The first is that they are quite typical of how serial killers write from prisons, this desperate desire to be at the heart of the story. And here Hardy wants to sell his possessions through Christie's, wants to have a biographer, wants to send his clothes to Madame Tussauds. But the second thing that's interesting is that the letters don't really come across as somebody who's a manic depressive. They come across instead of being manipulative in two different ways. Manipulative of the mental health system. He wants his visitor to come to Broadmoor rather than to the prison because visiting arrangements are easier. But also manipulative of the woman he's writing to. So it's this sense of using vulnerable women to his own ends. But here's the chilling phrase. There is much more than anyone imagines to be revealed. Now, doesn't that imply that there are other cases that might be worth considering that we could possibly connect to Anthony Hardy?
This chilling revelation from a convicted serial killer cannot be ignored. Does his murderous career include more victims than anyone has previously realised? Convicted serial killer Anthony Hardy became known as the Camden Ripper for the horrific way in which he killed 3 women. But in order to connect him to any so far unsolved murders, I need to understand his unique method of killing. The similarities in a killer's crimes are known as their modus operandi, or mode of operation. In modern crime theory, it's one of the most vital tools we can use to gain valuable insight into a killer's unique pattern of behaviour. Analysing the distinctive ways in which these crimes were carried out can provide clues as to whether other crimes have been committed by the same person. Hardy claimed all 3 victims had died due to excessive force inflicted during violent sex. Sexual dominance and control seems central to his crimes. I need to establish if any unsolved cases exhibit this unusual MO.
My students actually set me quite a difficult task, I think. Firstly, because of the timescale they were suggesting. So I put in a couple of freedom of information requests. I did therefore get a list of unsolved murders involving sex workers throughout England and Wales, and I was able to generate a sample of some 18. But if I narrow that down by location to London, and also looking at those specific MO issues, and the 2 cases I'm left with therefore involved asphyxiation. And these were the cases involving Sharon Hoare in 1991 and Christine McGovern in 1995. And it's those 2 cases I'm going to focus on in my search in relation to other crimes Anthony Hardy might have committed.
Before I look into these cold cases, I first need to understand the distinctive hallmarks of death by asphyxia.
I'm Dr. Stuart John Hamilton, and I'm a Home Office registered forensic pathologist. As a Home Office pathologist, I deal with suspicious deaths and homicides and present my findings to the courts. Although asphyxia is a quite common mode of death, homicidal asphyxia is relatively rare.
Dr. Hamilton can give me an insight into the potential causes of this rare form of murder.
Stuart, I'm looking at a number of cases that involve asphyxiation, but when the public hears that word asphyxiation, they don't realise how diverse a phenomenon that is, do they?
No, I mean, when people think about asphyxia, I think what most people are thinking about is strangulation with a ligature or with hands, or possibly what we call crush asphyxia.
And what's crush asphyxia?
Crush asphyxia is a very specific thing. Essentially, what you're getting is you're getting the chest crushed by something. As it compresses it, it prevents the blood flowing back into the chest, back into the heart, and the blood then dams up in the head, so up here. And what you get with that is the build-up of the blood causes the face to go very, very purple and suffused.
When you were demonstrating to me crushing and the breaking of the ribs, you used your hands, but a perpetrator could also kneel on, straddle, lie over the victim's body, could they not?
Oh, of course. If I'm simply pressing down on this, then this person here is, unless they're unconscious, able to fight me off, to try and roll away. If you're putting your body weight, that's a lot of pressure right in the middle there, stopping them moving. So you've got an element of being able to restrain somebody as well as something that can potentially kill you.
Aware of this unique method of murder, the first cold case I want to investigate took place in 1995 when 47-year-old sex worker Christine McGovern was found naked in her home in Walthamstow, just a few miles to the east of Camden.
Some murders become iconic in our culture. They generate huge press interest, whilst other murders disappear almost from public view immediately after they've happened. The murder of Christine McGovern here in June 1995 was one of those murders that at most had 3 columns in the local newspaper. But there's something about Christine McGovern's murder that seems to me to be far more resonant of Anthony Hardy. First, in relation to the area I'm in, Walthamstow, but secondly, in relation to some of the crime scene behaviours that we see in relation to the murder itself.
Christine's flat had been ransacked, suggesting a robbery, but valuable items, including a mobile phone, were left untouched, indicating robbery was not the killer's main motive. Her body had been left in the bath.
This is a very confused crime scene because we've got elements of organisation and disorganisation. The one thing that we can say with certainty is that the door to the bathroom wasn't broken down. That implies that she was murdered somewhere else. But there's one key fact going on here. Christine's spine was broken. Now that does imply that the murderer came behind Christine and squeezed her, and then possibly carried her into the bathroom. Why did he do that? Well, clearly there's water in the bath. He's trying to perhaps make it look as if this is suicide, or he did it because he was trying to finish her off. We've also got some bloody prints on the tiles of the bath. Now, if the killer had been thinking clearly, he would have wiped away. So what we can say with certainty, because of the crushed spine, because of her broken nose, that there's an element of overkill going on here. That implies a great deal of anger.
I was initially drawn to this case as Christine's violent death exhibits similarities to the grisly injuries that Hardy was known to inflict upon his victims. But digging deeper into Hardy's behaviour in 1995, I've discovered some compelling information, possibly the first real lead in this case since Christine was murdered.
I'm reading the independent report that was commissioned on the care and treatment of Anthony Hardy after his conviction. Why I wanted to read this was because it would allow me to build up a picture of Hardy and his movements before the murders that he committed. And I'm particularly concentrating on 1995. And we know, of course, that Christine McGovern is murdered in June 1995. So where was Hardy and what was he like? It tells us that in May 1995, Hardy gets admitted for 3 days to Camden Mental Health Services. And as he was being admitted, the staff noted that he was ranting and raving and clearly psychotic. Now remember, that's some 6 weeks before Christine's murder. And then in August of that year, he has a major overdose. So what this report shows us, that in 1995, between May and August, Anthony Hardy is in the middle of a major psychotic episode. And at the heart of that psychotic episode, Christine McGovern is murdered. But there's one other thing. This report also takes us all the way back to 1981, when Hardy first comes to the attention of a criminal justice system. And it's because of an attempted murder, the attempted murder of his then wife, whom he hits over the head with a bottle and then tries to drown in her bath.
I believe that there's rarely such a thing as coincidence in serial murder, so this link feels important. Another link is that Hardy regularly used sex workers, preferring to contact them through adverts placed in magazines, where Christine was known to advertise her services. This would also be a factor that connects the second unsolved cold case on my list. 4 years before Christine's murder, 19-year-old Sharon Hoare's naked body was found at home by her flatmate in Chelsea, southwest London. An aspiring model, she'd suffered broken bones during a beating before being asphyxiated. Her flat had also been ransacked, but £100 was left untouched. Her killer has never been identified.
It was in the flat behind me that 19-year-old Sharon Hoare was found battered and asphyxiated in August 1991. Like many young people, Sharon had moved from her home, in her case in Bristol, to London in the hopes of becoming a model, but very quickly ended up selling sexual services. And she'd advertised those services in contact magazines and in newspapers. Now, battering, asphyxiation, sex workers, we're dealing with Hardy's MO here. But what isn't Hardy's MO is the fact that I'm in Chelsea. For me, Hardy and Chelsea don't really mix, and so I'm going to have to find out quite a lot more, I think, about this case.
To get an insight into Sharon's life, I've come to meet Danny Goddard, who's been a caretaker of these flats since 1990.
What do you remember about Sharon? Can you describe her as a person?
Yeah, she was just very quiet, you know. She, kept herself to herself, her and her flatmate.
Given that this is a gated estate, were there perhaps any witnesses in relation to what took place?
Well, there was a guy who came in around about 2 o'clock in the morning and saw someone going into her flat, or thought he saw someone going into her flat via the patio doors.
So there was a witness?
Yeah.
I mean, she's selling sexual services. Did clients come to
No,
here?
no, this is where she lived.
And do we know if she used a tube? How did she get from one place to another?
Mainly minicabs. Yeah, a lot of minicabs in and out here in the evenings.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting too for me. Were there any other attacks on sex workers in the local area?
Yeah, a couple, Earls Court and Queensgate at the time.
I'm intrigued that Danny told me about other attacks on sex workers in the West London area, and that's certainly something that I feel I'd like to pursue. But above all, what always interests me when we've been doing cold cases of this kind involving sex workers is the fact that actually Danny didn't know very much about Sharon Hoare. She kept herself to herself. There was a reluctance on her part, but also on everybody else's part, to describe the life of a sex worker and what women in those positions have to do to earn money. And so actually, I still feel I'd like to know more about Sharon Hoare.
To really understand how Sharon met her fate, her father has agreed to meet to discuss his daughter.
Jack, can you tell me a wee bit about what Sharon was like?
Sharon as a child was a little terror. She got up to the usual things that children would get up to.
What did Sharon want to do with her life?
As time went on, then Sharon had thoughts of she wanted to be into the law service, and then it was the doctor's service, and I don't think she really knew what she wanted.
And when the police told you about the murder, what did they say had happened?
And we were actually at a party at the time, and we'd had a phone call that we had to come home straight away. I can't describe it. I challenge anyone to describe how you could feel when someone tells you that. What do you do? Do you faint? Do you scream? I don't know. I would love closure. For all those people out there who think if you catch the culprit, everything's good after, I don't think they're right, but it does give you a bit of closure. But it would be nice to see someone punished, because that is not right, that someone could do this to a child. Is that guy, woman, whoever's done this deed, is out there walking around and perhaps having a good life? That can't be right. That can't be right at all. Yeah, I'm okay.
That was an incredibly moving interview. And, you know, really all I wanted from that interview was to gain a picture of Sharon as a person. What were her hopes, her dreams, her aspirations? And it seemed to me that Jack did that perfectly and clearly still has incredibly warm memories of his daughter.
Despite police investigations into Sharon's death, her killer's identity still remains a mystery. We tracked down the eyewitness, but they couldn't remember any relevant details. But I believe that my own research has yielded a new potential connection that has not previously been examined.
When I was at the Sharon Hoare murder scene, one of the things that I was finding difficult was to imagine Anthony Hardy in Chelsea. But Danny the caretaker let me know that at around the time that Sharon was murdered, there were other attacks on sex workers who were advertising their services in the newspaper and in contact magazines. So I've done a bit of research and come up with a story of attacks at that time in the Daily Express from August 19th, 1991, which incidentally also mentions the murder of Sharon Hoare. And the woman who survived one of these attacks was able to provide the police with a physical description of the man who attacked her. The police were able to produce from what she said a photo fit of the wanted man. And I just wonder if this photo fit of a large bearded man is going to help me link Anthony Hardy to the cold cases we're investigating.
Could this photo fit of the man who was attacking West London sex workers in 1991 finally unlock the mystery of who killed Sharon Hoare? I'm looking into links between convicted serial killer Anthony Hardy and two brutal unsolved murders that bear certain similarities to his known modus operandi. Hardy had lived rough and been in and out of mental institutions for years before settling in council accommodation in Camden in the year 2000. To discover more about him before this time, I've come to meet Frank Murray and Alex McDonnell, who worked in a homeless hostel where Hardy was resident in the early 1990s.
How did he first strike you? What was your first impression of him?
Well, he's a very striking man. He was very tall, very strong, very well built. We started to notice him when people were presenting with injuries.
Mm-hmm. What sort of injuries were they?
He was known as the Bone Crusher. That was his nickname in the hostel. He'd creep up behind people and grab them and just squeeze, and you'd hear bones cracking.
It could be anything from rather severe bruising right the way through to fractures.
Because one man had his shoulder broken, another man had bones in his ribs broken. He got caught, and we tried to evict him several times, or the hostel did. Everyone was too intimidated to testify in court, so...
Did you think even in the 1990s he was capable of murder?
Yes. Yes, I would say so.
Yeah, I think so as well, yeah. He'd pick people up and crush them in his bare hands.
When you heard about the subsequent murders that Anthony Hardy was convicted of, did that surprise either of you?
What surprised me was that they didn't come up with more victims.
Exactly.
I've been looking at a couple of cold cases from the 1990s. The woman's name probably means nothing to you. She's called Sharon Hoare, but this woman was murdered, and then a few days later, there was an attack on another woman who luckily survived. She was able to make a photo fit of the person who attacked her, and it's that. Does that strike you as the person that we've been describing in the 1990s?
Could very well be, yeah. If you were to give a description of Hardy, it would be broad, strong features, black hair and beard, and you know.
No, I seem to remember him wearing glasses.
He did used to wear glasses, yeah.
I thought that was an extraordinary interview. And what do they tell me? They give me this information that allows this picture of Hardy to emerge as the bone crusher. And in fact, the thing that they said that surprised them the most was that in 2002, he was only charged with 3 murders. As far as they were concerned, he was capable of murder even as far back as the 1990s. Now that immediately brings the cold cases of Sharon Hoare and Christine McGovern back into focus. And when I show Frank and Alex the photo fit, the very first time they've seen that photo fit, they both say, yeah, it looks like Anthony Hardy. For me, as far as I'm concerned, that's compelling evidence.
Sharon Hoare's father had told me about his daughter as a person, but he also wanted to tell me about a new lead he'd recently received.
Sharon's murder seemed to have disappeared from public view quite quickly. In the intervening time between her death and now, has anybody ever come forward with other information that was helpful?
Only the last couple of months, where I had an email to say, I think the minicab driver should be investigated, which I thought was quite odd at the time. And I remember the other thing they said is that they found an impression on her stomach of someone like kneeling on her, perhaps with a pair of cord trousers on.
Kneeling on her
kneeling
stomach?
on her stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's ever come of that.
Are we the first people who have ever interviewed you in all this time about your daughter and her murder?
Yes.
He revealed 2 other pieces of information which were frankly unexpected, because he told me about the minicab driver and then gave me that second crucial piece of information as far as I'm concerned about how Sharon had been murdered, which was that her killer had knelt on her stomach. That, for me, brings Anthony Hardy to the foreground of this investigation.
Crushing fits Hardy's MO, but I needed to speak to someone who knew him better at the time to discover if I could make a stronger connection to Jack's new lead. By chance, Bridget McLennan's friend Mary MacDonald had come across Hardy just 6 months after Sharon Hoare's murder in 1991. The revelation that Hardy worked as a minicab driver and the fact that Sharon Hoare was last sighted in one before her murder, although circumstantial, is a significant lead. His similarity to the photo fit of a man seen attacking sex workers in West London at the time feels important too. That the Christine McGovern crime scene also exhibited some similarities to Hardy's known MO makes me believe that there are enough compelling links to warrant further investigation by the police in both these cases.
Anthony Hardy's been a very difficult case to crack for a number of reasons, and he's come across as very cunning, very manipulative. And that manipulation seems to me to indicate that he's perfectly capable of having killed more women than the 3 women he's been convicted of having murdered. And it seems to me that if the police looked more closely at the cold cases of sex workers who've been asphyxiated, then I think people like Jack would get the justice that they deserve.